Good morning.
Good morning. Like, who's going to say good morning first?
Let's say it together.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Angie. Good to have you with us this morning.
Welcome, whether you're watching now, this second, or later online, on the podcast, on demand.
We just get
all of
everywhere.
Those options. It gets you can't escape us.
You can't escape us, I know. It's a bit like that on social media sometimes. I know, Holy Baptist again. Good.
Yes,
Holy Baptist
that's
again.
good.
It's good, yeah. Follow us on Instagram. Instagram's been good recently. We've got someone new doing our Instagram. It's been good recently. So follow us on Instagram or Facebook.
I'm quite bad at Instagram.
Are you?
I forget that it's there. And then
yeah.
Martin and one of my other friends sends me lots of messages. Like, this is a funny clip. And it's like a month's worth.
To catch up on, yeah. But no, so you can find us there. But anyway, good to have you with us.
Yes.
So today, new series. It is called Zero to Hero.
Which reminded me of a song. For those of you who know Disney Hercules, the cartoon version, and the Musos, I think they're called Musos. Anyway, they sing Zero to Hero in No Time Flat or something like that. I'm not going to sing it because I was trying to remember the tune and probably would be flat. We're not doing any justice.
No, anyway, we're not looking at Hercules, funny enough.
No.
Gideon, yeah. Gideon, great story, Gideon, and today it's called The Call of the Coward. So I think at the start of the story, my memory is that Gideon's a little bit...
It's hiding away, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hiding away, doesn't really want to think that he's going to be some sort of hero or anything.
But God has other plans, so stay with us. So Dave Pryor will be speaking this morning. If you're listening to this on a podcast, just to let you know that today the sermon will be BSL interpreted by Helen. So if you wanted to watch that, you could catch that on our YouTube channel.
Oh, that's useful.
Use good info. Or if you had anyone, I guess if you were listening to, anyway, if you had anyone who you think would benefit from it.
Yes, they can watch it.
So so listen up. I think the story of Gideon's one of those that has got something to say to all of us, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think there's a lot of times where you might be given a task at work or life just seems slightly overwhelming and you can feel a bit like I haven't got the skill set or I haven't got the tools in my arsenal to deal with this. And you can feel you can feel probably like a zero rather than a hero. You feel a bit overwhelmed and anxious maybe. And I think we all have times where that crops up in our lives, whether, I remember the first time holding my eldest daughter thinking, oh dear, somebody's trusting me with this baby. Well, I've grown inside me. I've got this baby now. And I haven't got a Scooby of what to do with this baby. So I think we can all have those times where you can feel completely out of your depth or like, but you've got to do it. You've got to sort of get through it somehow. And I think this particularly today might help us think about how we get through it. How do we draw on a strength that's not our own to manage the situations we might find ourselves in. Yeah.
And I always think it's good when we're actually looking at a character, because rather than just listening to...
Makes it real, doesn't it?
Yeah, makes it really real. This sort of one makes it really practical. So shall we have a look and see what this series is all about? Let's do that.
Have you ever felt too weak, too scared, or too insignificant to make a difference? So did Gideon. But God doesn't see us as we are. He sees who we can become. Gideon was called out of fear, shaped by faith, and led an army to victory against impossible odds. Yet even heroes have their flaws. Join us for a 4-part journey through the life of Gideon. A story of faith.
Good morning, everyone. So that caught me on the hop a bit, that video finishing then. I should have been a bit more ready. I've got an 8-year-old who loves her jokes, and when she heard I was speaking this morning, she said, "You've got to tell a joke this morning to everyone." So, well, it's not a comedy show or anything like that, is it? But I thought, well, it's always good to have a bit of an icebreaker, isn't it? So you've got to weigh these things up a bit. So I thought, let's not today. No, actually, we will. I said I will. I promised her I would. So here's the joke. Here we go. Nice icebreaker to relax me, especially as well. So, how do you make a sausage roll? You push it down a hill. Hey, there we go. Thank you. She'll be very pleased I've said that this morning. So we got a new sermon series this morning looking at Gideon. So it's a privilege to do the first one today. Gideon was quite a significant figure in the Old Testament. So if we're looking in context, it's about 1,200 years before Jesus. And at that time of Gideon, we're going to be looking at the verse from Judges in a bit. But leading up to the verse we're going to be looking at, it was a time when Israel had been invaded by a group of people called the Midianites, and it had followed quite a substantial period of peace. But the Midianites had invaded Israel, and there's verses in the preceding verses which we're going to look at this morning that talk about them invading like a swarm of locusts. So it's, the metaphors and things is trying to make it very clear where they are at the moment. They decimated the crops, the livestock and everything. So Israel wasn't in a very good place at the time from the invading forces. And as we see throughout the Old Testament, when things get bad for the Israelites, they tend to cry out to God. So let's look at this verse this morning. If you've got a Bible, keep the Bible open because we're going to be going back to the verses and looking at them and referring back. But it's going to be coming up on the screen as well. So we're looking from Judges chapter 6, in verse 11. Just give you a moment if you need to find the verses there. Okay, and we're reading through to verse 24 from here. This is the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all these wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace. Do not be afraid. You are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Okay, so let's start off with the verse here. Now, some of the eagle-eyed amongst you, or anyone who is just listening, perhaps, you'll notice that with this visit from the angel, Gideon refers to the angel as Lord. As well as the passage actually goes on to say how the Lord spoke to Gideon. So my mind was whirring a little bit with this because, you read a passage many times especially when you're preparing a sermon, and I'm trying to get my head around, well, is it the angel who's speaking to Gideon? Is it God who's speaking to Gideon? So of course, times like this, you go to Martin, who goes to a Bible commentary and comes back with a good answer, which is always helpful. But the answer, and I found this very interesting. Now I've got to try and pronounce this correctly, but the correct phrase is anthropomorphism. Okay, so it means that the angel of the Lord and the Lord can actually be used sort of synonymously, if you like. You can switch between the two identities. So is it going to be something that's particularly helpful for this passage? Perhaps not. I don't know. It's more of a big theological point, if you like. It's not going to be it's probably not going to be something to take away this morning. But if you've read that and wondered, I think it's always good to learn a little bit more about the Bible at times. So we're introduced to Gideon here, and the first we see of Gideon, he's threshing the wheat, and it says that he's actually doing it in a wine press. Now, at the time, if you were to thresh wheat, it would be done like a big open space. So the fact he's doing it in a wine press, he's actually trying to keep it from the Midianites. So we know he's in this situation where he's actually feeling quite scared of them, rightly so. And the angel comes to him, or God, and refers to him as mighty warrior. It's one of the first things that gets said to him. Also, I think it's interesting, if you see at the passage, the angel actually sits down. I wonder if that was a bit of a ploy, if you like, just to try and remove a little bit of the amazement that Gideon might have felt at that moment. But, straight away, when the angel speaks to him, we see, and Gideon says it twice in this passage we've looked at today, he says, "Pardon me, my lord." I've tried to get the expression, the voice a bit about how I think Gideon might have actually said it at that moment, of actually saying like, "Well, pardon me, but," because Gideon's not having any of it at this moment. The angels come to him, "Mighty warrior, we've got, these plans for you." And Gideon said, "Well, I'm not interested." And actually, if you look back at what God has done in the past for the Israelites, how come we are in this situation now? Because Gideon knows what's happened in the past. He knows the stories of what God has done for Israel. And yet he looks around him and he sees what's going on and he sees the oppression of the people, and he's not happy. One thing Gideon's definitely not, though, he's not apathetic. And we can see that in his words, can't we? He deeply cares. He's angry. He's got questions. He's got hard questions. He's probably a bit bitter at this point as well. But he's not apathetic. He cares. He deeply cares. But you can see he's scared as well. We know he's scared. And, the title of this morning is The Call of the Coward. I don't know what you think about that. Is that a bit harsh? Is Gideon a coward at this point? We know he's scared. Has he got a right to be scared? Now, if we look in verse 14 of the passage here, we can see that God, or the angel says, "Go in the strength you have," which leads to the reply that we've just seen Gideon make. Now, what strength did Gideon have? Can we look at the passage and see any strengths actually that are obvious to us just from reading the verses there? I've read those verses time and time again, looking through them, and I think there actually are a few strengths that Gideon had. So let's see if this works. There we go. Put up a list of strengths there that I think actually Gideon had at this time. I think he had the strength of humility. He was a manual worker. He was earning his living quietly. There's also that phrase, isn't it, when he talks about his tribe and the tribe he was part of Israel, and he said, like, "My tribe is the weakest of them all." And actually, out of those, the weakest, out of the weakest tribe, I'm actually least in the weakest. So he's humble. He's got the strength of caring. Gideon really cares. He cares because we see some of that anger that came out. He cares because he loves his country and he wants to see them prosper. He wants them to be free of the oppressors. We've got the strength of knowledge. We can see Gideon knows his history, doesn't he? He knows those miracles and the things that God has done in the past. the strength of being spiritually hungry. Because you can see something in Gideon there that actually he wants to see God move again as he has previously. But also the last one, the strength of being weak. Because he knows, actually, he's been referred to as a mighty warrior. And Gideon probably knows in himself that actually he's not a mighty warrior. But God obviously knew that Gideon had these strengths, and it was because of these, I would say, not in spite of these, that God called Gideon to this. But Gideon wants a sign from God, doesn't he? He's being called, and it's quite a big thing. He says, he's going to save Israel. It's no small thing that God's called him to. So probably quite rightly, he asked for a sign. And so God performs what is essentially a miracle, doesn't he? It was quite spectacular with the fire coming from the rock and consuming the food. And I think we know Gideon's state of mind for this when God says to him, peace. Gideon's reaction to this, he must have been afraid of what was happening. But God says to him, peace, do not be afraid. And in response to this, Gideon builds this altar, which he names the Lord is peace. And I think we can deduce a little bit from that Gideon's moved from this place of being, and he probably still has these difficult questions, of being angry, of being bitter, of not really being very sure about things, to actually having a sense of peace because of his encounter with God and what he has seen God do. So what does that mean for us, and what can we learn from the story of Gideon? How can we learn something from this that will impact our lives? Now, the big thing I've taken from this and reading this is this idea and the realization, I think, that Gideon had a lot of unrecognized strengths within him. Perhaps he didn't even see those himself. But I think it's a big one because God saw those qualities of Gideon. It wasn't in spite of who he was. I think it was these things that he hadn't actually recognized as being strengths and qualities. Now, they weren't necessarily qualities Gideon thought would make him into this great warrior, but God saw beyond what was on that outwards and actually saw what was in Gideon and what would basically make him into the great leader that he was. We shouldn't underestimate those traits and those strengths that we have as well, that maybe you're not even aware you have this morning. There might be things that you know that you're good at. There might be things that you don't know that you're good at. Don't underestimate those traits and qualities and strengths that we have that you might not necessarily see as strengths. And the second thing I want to say is how peace leads to action. I'm going to put this quote up here. There we go. Can you read that? It looks a bit small. Should have made that bigger. It's a quote from Charles Spurgeon, a Bible teacher from the 1800s. Oh, that's probably a bit of an injustice just saying that. But let me read this out anyway. When Gideon is fully at peace, what does he begin to do for God? If God loves you, he will use you either for suffering or service. And if he has given you peace, you must now prepare for war. Will you think me odd if I say that our Lord came to give us peace, that he might send us out to war? Now, that quote, I think, is specifically talking, on one hand, specifically talking about the story of Gideon and how Gideon's been put at peace by God. And from that, he needs to go out into war, literally in this case. It's an oppressing force in the country. Gideon's been called as a leader against that. But we can relate to that as well, I think. Not literally in terms of war, but in this idea that when God gives us peace, that isn't peace just to rest, that's peace then to go out in service, as Gideon did, and as we'll begin to see over the next few weeks of the things he did. So it's something we can take for that actually when we have that peace, it's not peace just to rest, it's peace to actually propel us to action and to serve. And lastly, just the fact, let me get these three up on the screen. Lastly, just the fact that God loves us. And maybe that's something that you need to hear this morning. Or maybe that's something you've heard for the first time this morning. Gideon's story is part of this overall arch, isn't it, in the Old Testament that shows God's great love for Israel and leads us on to show how his love is great for all of us. Maybe you think you're not good enough to serve God. Maybe you don't think you've got those qualities to serve God. But because God loves us, that makes us good enough to serve him. So I just want to finish with this other quote here. Your willingness to serve God is as important as your service to God. Something to bear in mind, I think, when we look through the Bible, and Gideon's just one of many people in the Bible who didn't think they were good enough, but they had qualities that God saw. You have qualities that God sees, and ultimately it's just having that willingness to serve God, which he needs as well. I think we're just going to have a look at some questions that are going to come up.
When it comes to serving God, what scares you? What strengths do you have that you may not perceive as strengths? How willing are you to serve God in a specific way, even when you don't feel quite ready to?
Well,
wow. Thanks, Dave.
Yes, thank you. So we've got those questions. So we thought, well, I mean, they're all good questions, all quite challenging questions,
They are
actually.
challenging questions, yeah.
What strengths do you have that you may not perceive as strengths? Well, we were kind of thinking it's like what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. So maybe it's one of those things that you can talk about others.
Yes.
If you know what I mean. Now, if we've prepared, we would like to come up with nice ones for each other. But we haven't done that.
But we haven't done that.
But I guess sometimes strengths can be, being calm can be a strength, can't it? So
you might not see that as a strength for yourself.
Yeah. So someone who's always calm in a crisis, or or someone who is, someone who's got a bit of tenacity, just to sort of to get in there and change something and to speak up. That can be a strength that might not be an obvious strength.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because what you might not perceive as strengths, I suppose it's those things that you do automatically that you just think, oh, well, that's just what you do, and actually don't realise that maybe other people don't react in that way or don't do things like that, and other people see that strength in you, but you would just be like, I'm just doing what I would do. It's like that. You don't see it as a strength.
Absolutely. I was applying for a job recently, and I thought, I haven't got anything to offer this. I've got no transferable skills, nothing I could put here. And then chatting to people, they're like, okay, you're right. It's just that thing. Can't everyone do that? I wouldn't put that down on a form, because surely everyone can do that.
Yeah, but not everybody can. And I think there is that, isn't there? So, and often we can go through life, feeling like imposters, can't you? You can go through life feel like you've got imposter syndrome. So, and particularly in what you do, maybe at work, I was talking about earlier, being given something that you think, I haven't got the skills to do this, I feel a bit of an imposter.
Yes.
But there's a reason why you're in that job. There's a reason why somebody saw the strengths in you, or the potential, or whatever it was. And then, so you're not an imposter, but you can have that imposter syndrome, which can rob you a little bit of the knowledge of that actually you've got the strengths to do something. You have got the ability to do. I always say that I'm the master of winging it. Yeah. So actually it must be a strength, mustn't it? Because people say when you're winging it that actually that could be a weakness, because you're kind of having to struggle through or muddle through. But actually, and then somebody said to me, but you're not, from their point of view, but you're not winging it, because it's all the life experience, knowledge, all the stuff that you've gathered along the way. And in that moment when somebody says, can you do this, and you think, I'm winging it because I really don't know what the answer is, but you do, because actually it's all of this that helps you to wing it. And so and so there's my strength, that is winging it.
That is an absolute strength, bringing in all those resources, and being able to do it. And I guess that leads on to the next question, doesn't it? So how willing are you to serve God in a specific way, even when you don't feel quite ready? So I think it's sort of recognising that we've got those strengths that we don't know we have, or trusting that God is going to equip us with those sometimes. So a bit like Gideon,
or draw them out.
It's a bit like Gideon felt he hadn't got any, hadn't used, and I guess he, hadn't used any of those strengths, but sort of trusted that God. But sometimes it's easier. You listen to Bible stories, don't you? You think it was right for Gideon. He had an angel come and talk to him.
And tell him his strength. Tell him he's a warrior.
I know, and you sort of think, if God appeared now and just said, okay, but but it's not like that, and it probably wasn't like that. I don't know what it was like.
Well, I don't know, because I think you'd. But then sometimes I think with that, are you then doing it out of fear? Like, well, I've had the angel of the Lord come and tell me I am a warrior and I'm going to lead people to war. I'm going to have to do that now because I've got nowhere to hide, or be able to say, I think you've got the wrong person here, which is probably what I'd say. Or I think you might have misdirected yourself. Did your Google Maps off, But the thing is, it's like, actually, I think there's a thing there, isn't there, about reasoning it away. So, like, if you've got the angel of the Lord standing in front of you saying, this is what you need to be able to, you can do it, and this is what you're going to do. I bet there was still that moment of Gideon going, yes, I'm sure you see that in me, but, and I think because we don't have, like you just said, that character come and tell us, that God come and actually physically feel like he's stood in the room telling you, we reason away, we come up with the reasons why we can't, why we won't, why we don't. And actually that sort of, that's not really a gut instinct, but it's that kind of inner voice, which is God probably going, I want you to, or you need to step out. And that niggling is actually God saying, I want you to do this. And it's how much stronger that niggling voice is to the reasoning away.
Yeah.
And I think it all comes full circle back to the first question, actually, which is when it comes to God, what scares you? So when you've got that niggling voice, like, I'll go for that job, and you're going, well, I don't know, I don't have any of those skills, why would I put that down? But there's something niggling away going, you should go for that job, And it's that, there's a fear of, you might not get it, you might be rejected, you might feel like you might not be good enough, all those things that you can almost reason it away and go, oh no, that's just me being silly to follow this.
But it's difficult because sometimes that's the right thing to do. So sometimes it's not what God's telling you to do, and you do have to be sensible and rational.
How do you
discern? It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do we then come back to that quote that Dave used, was it the Spurgeon quote about when you're in peace, you're getting prepared for something. And sometimes it's those times when it's quiet, and that's when you're being prepared and you're hearing all these messages. I don't know what I'm saying really, but that's the time when you hear
stillness,
things, and in the stillness, or people talking to you, or things you read, or things you hear, and actually, God can use those times, can't he, to say, okay, come on, the time's coming.
And I think it's very easy to sit in that comfortable zone. So like Dave was saying, is the peace time is not for you to just sit in it and stay in it. And sometimes we can be in a very comfortable place and feel at peace and feel happy there, and everything seems to be going nicely. But actually, there could be so much more if you just pushed out of that comfort zone, out of that peaceful time, because it's actually preparing you for more. And I think, it's about, not missing out on what more you could have, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's quite scary to step out that space,
Yes.
because actually you think, well, I quite like it here. This is quite comfortable. If I step out, everything could go wrong. And that's where the fear comes in, is that kind of scary bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you become scared about things. The less you do, the more scared you become. So I was thinking about going back to work, and I had completely irrational fears that crossed my mind. So, like, I know there was an advert for a job in a shop. And I thought, what happens if I get a difficult customer? I won't know what to say. And there was another, I forget what other job. And I was thinking, but they're completely irrational, because there are gazillions of people who work in shops that deal with difficult customers, and I am well equipped to deal with that. But the less you are involved in things and doing stuff, the more scary it becomes.
Yeah. The more out of it you've become.
Absolutely right, absolutely. And I think that's when we get scared, isn't it? When God's calling us to do something different, or something we haven't done for a long time,
and then that comes back to that sort of like you haven't realised or perceived your own strengths. That actually you're perfectly capable of dealing with a difficult customer, but actually in that moment, all the fear and of it, and not, you can't see your own strengths.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And in those things, you just need to step out.
And hope for the best.
And what's the worst that can happen? Hey, what's the worst that can happen? But it is that, isn't it? Knowing that it's God that's calling you, and God, and sometimes you just need to take a risk, I think. So sometimes if you think God is calling you to do something and you're not 100% certain, well, sometimes what is there to lose anyway? And if you haven't got the complete,
it just won't work out. Maybe
that's right. Because it's not always that we're not always that good at listening to God. I don't think. I think
no, and like you said earlier, it's discerning. It's the niggling voice, right, that you need to step out and get a job, or is the fear or the questioning of it right, that actually shouldn't get a job, and which one's God sitting in? And you don't know.
You don't always know
until you kind of, and it's all that sort of like old adage when people sometimes will talk about pushing the door to see if it opens. And if it doesn't, then you kind of go, okay, well, I've tried and God hasn't opened the door. But I think there's an element of like, actually, some part of me sometimes thinks he wants you to be fulfilled in where you're going, and actually whether you got that job or not actually doesn't matter to what he wants you to do. So that's not the big thing.
Yes, no, absolutely.
The big thing is actually, are you serving him? Are you showing people God in your life? Whether you're working in that job or you're not working that job is immaterial in a way.
Yeah, and interesting, just to sort of finishing off, but Dave's last point was about something about being willing to serve is just as important as serving. I think I may have misquoted that.
No, you're right. You're right. So the service itself is just, doing the service itself is just, and be willing to serve God is just as important as doing the service itself, type thing.
I think that's really good.
Wow. If you've got any questions, because we've probably created more, you can email in. I've got questions at hawleybaptist.org.uk. Also, if you feel this has been really useful for yourself, or you're liking this new series or any of our other series, please do share with your friends and family and colleagues, because they might find it useful as well.